Mr. Sinha, we've just got this news that the railway budget now will be part of the union budget. No more separate railway budgets. Will we be therefore short on details from the railway ministry, or will it be business as usual?
No, come again, I couldn't hear you.
No. Will it be business as usual for the railways when their budgets get collapsed into the union budget? Or do you think that the railways may suffer probably lower monies, lower powers to raise debt? Will it change the railways' autonomous position in any fashion?
Well, it will depend, Shireen, on what is worked out bilaterally between the Finance Ministry and the Railway Ministry now, and especially in terms of the autonomy that the railways would enjoy in future, because the separate railway budget had in the past assured a certain amount of autonomy to the railways, and one will wait and see what are the details of the arrangement on this issue, autonomy of the railways. Railways cannot be treated like any other department of the government. The other departments and ministries of the government have had their budgets through the general budget, but this is the first time that the railways will have this. But my own feeling is that the Finance Ministry will have to grant a lot of autonomy to the Ministry of Railways. And let me give you an example. You know, there used to be that system in the past that the gross budgetary support for the plan was worked out in every budget after lengthy discussions between the Finance Ministry and the Planning Commission. And once the gross budgetary support was worked out, then, though the Finance Ministry at the official level was involved, the allocation of those funds between the ministries and the states was done by the Planning Commission.
Okay.
And I remember there are many occasions where, as Finance Minister, I would be unhappy with the decision taken by the Deputy Chairperson of the Planning Commission.
Okay.
But it was so. So will this mean that the Finance Minister will state their gross railway budget and the details will then be worked out by the railways as in the past, or will it be more detailed accounts of the railways reflected in the general?
I guess we'll have more clarity on that, Mr. Sinha, at 1 p.m., which is when we expect the Finance Minister to brief us. But let me ask you about the other big development of the day, and that is advancing the date of the union budget itself. Mr. Sinha, you were responsible for taking the budget from an evening appointment to a morning appointment. So since then, this is the next big change that has happened on the economic calendar as far as the budget itself is concerned. The Finance Minister in his conversation with us tried to explain the rationale behind advancing the budget date itself. Do you believe that this is a step in the right direction?
Well, I'm happy that the small little step which I had taken of changing the time of the presentation of budget to Parliament is now being considerably changed by advancing the date of the budget and probably have it in the first week of February. That is, of course, a very major change which is going to take place. But
you expect, therefore, sir, that
it has pluses and minuses, and on the minuses side, the government will have to be quite careful to ensure.
So, what would be the key minuses to your mind of advancing the budget,
sir? That you will be. There are two things. One is that for the current year, for which the budget had been presented earlier, you will have to guess the expenditure which will be incurred in the last quarter of that financial year.
So you expect more expenditure to lapse? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Sinha?
No, I'm saying that the fiscal deficit will be difficult to calculate in real terms 1 or 4 weeks ahead of the normal presentation of the budget now. In today you had only to anticipate let's say, 6 weeks. Now you'll have, almost 12 weeks. So that is one where you'll have to guess what and we all know that expenditure is bunched in the last quarter.
Okay.
The second is, the budget reflects on the economic situation in the coming year for which the budget is being prepared. So to that extent, again, the finance minister will have to guess what is going to happen in the next year. All these things will have to be done very carefully so that we don't miss the mark.
I also wanted to get your comments, Mr. Sinha, on the other change that has been now approved by the cabinet. And this was an intent that was expressed in this year's budget by the finance minister to do away with the distinction between planned and non-planned expenditure. Sir, what to your mind will that imply now?
Well, if there is no planning commission, there is no planning. What is the use of having planned expenditure reflected separately in the budget? So it will now only be capital and revenue. But I wish on capital and revenue also, the government takes into account the recommendations of the Rangarajan committee and maybe not in this budget, but in a future budget makes a move which will reflect clearly and honestly the amount of money which is going for investment.
Okay. You don't fear that capital expenditure may suffer because you don't have this distinction between plan and non-plan?
No, because as you are aware, plan expenditure also had capital and revenue.
Yes.
So therefore, it's not likely to suffer. All plan expenditure was not investment expenditure, not capital expenditure.
Okay, so for the railways itself, you fear investments may come down because of the collapsing of the two budgets or in any ways their ability to raise money through the IRFC?
May or may not, because if that is worked out, as in the case of states, when you are discussing in the earlier days, when the plan was being discussed with the states, the amount of market borrowing by the states was also included in the overall plan allocation. So when you discuss the railway budget with the railway ministry, borrowing from the IRFC can be worked out and stated in the budget.
Right. Mr. Sinha, approved by the cabinet. We, of course, await more details and clarity on finally what the budget date will be. But we've got another big set of recommendations that are expected at the end of the month, at the end of October, actually, the NK Singh committee on reviewing the fiscal framework itself and what we should do or how we should address the fiscal deficit itself. Given the fact that we're now seeing these changes, how likely or what would your view really be on how the government should address whether it should be a band as far as the fiscal deficit is concerned, as far as rejigging the fiscal framework itself?
No, I am not in favor of a ban. I am not in favor of government taking liberties with the bill, with the act. And I was very unhappy when we had to accept the recommendation of the standing committee and give a much longer rope to the government when I had prepared the bill. I wanted to be very strict, and I would hope that the fiscal responsibility and management bill will not be an open-ended thing for every government to take liberties with it, but it should be a time-bound thing, especially now. And within 3 years, we should say that we'll do away with revenue deficit and ultimately live with 3% of fiscal deficit.
Well, actually, the NK Singh committee is expected to speak about general deficit. So it would be union plus state deficit that they will speak about.
Even better. But let me tell you that after the states adopted their Fiscal Responsibility Act, then the performance of the states has been much better than the government of India.
Yes.
Mr. Sinha, as far as this change obviously is now going to be implemented, as we can understand, it has not been confirmed yet, but from next year itself, which means that as opposed to the 28th of February, perhaps we'll see the budget being advanced to the 31st of January or the 1st of February. We understand that the pre-budget consultation process has already begun, but what will it take now for North Block to really be ready for this advanced date, sir?
No, they'll have to advance the entire calendar. My experience is that the Finance Ministry started the first discussions which were started on the next year's budget by the Finance Ministry was with the ministries of the Government of India with regard to their expenditure in the current year and with regard to the possible expenditure in the next year. So that used to take place from November sometimes, and this will have to be advanced by a month and perhaps begin from October 1st or any date around that. So the first will be the discussion between the various line ministries and the Ministry of Finance to fix the expenditure budget of the Government of India.
So,
then you discuss the Part B of the budget, which is exclusively the preserve of the Finance Ministry. And there, with GST and stability in customs and direct taxes rates, there is not much left for the Finance Minister to do. And I hope that in future, Finance Ministers will not tweak customs duties or income tax rates here and there. GST, of course, will become will be cast in stone, and you can't.
That is exactly what I was going to ask you. Since in any case, 40% of tax revenues are going out of the budget to the GST Council, will it really be necessary to have such a long budget planning at all? Because not much is tweakable anyways.
No, the expenditure side has to be planned properly so that we are not we don't miss the mark on the expenditure side. But as far as the revenue is concerned, on the revenue side, as you're aware, the sexy part was indirect taxes. And on indirect taxes, with the GST now, much of it is gone. The only indirect tax which remains is customs duty. And that is also now stabilized over the years. So there is not much meat left there for change.
Okay. Will that make, if you were Finance Minister today, will reaching the fiscal deficit be therefore more difficult because you don't have control over 40%?
No, you have control. After all, it's the Finance Minister of India who is presiding over the GST Council.
Right.
And of course, you'll have to have you'll have to give more cooperation to the states and take more cooperation from the states.
Mr. Sinha, since we do have you today, tomorrow is that crucial meeting of the GST Council. This is the first meeting since the GST Council itself was notified. Now the hard work really begins on what happens to exemptions, what happens as far as rates are concerned. What would your advice really be? The centre seems still inclined to pushing for 18 to 19% as the standard rate. States, we understand, would like something more than 20%, at least closer to 22%. Do you believe that the rate will perhaps have to be somewhere in the middle?
I've read in the media that they are likely to have more than one rate. There'll probably be 4 rates or 5 rates. So the mean rate could be anything. Anything between 16 and 18, depending on how much you are collecting through the other rates. You will recall that when I was Finance Minister, I had collapsed all the 12, 15 excise duty rates into 3 rates. And the 3 rates were one mean rate, one was a merit rate, and the other was a demerit rate. And I don't think there is really justification for more than 3 rates, even as far as GST is concerned. Anything more than 3 rates will lead to administrative complications.
Sorry, sir.
They should settle for 3 rates and work it out in such a way that there is no loss of revenue. And through better compliance, they are in fact, the states and the centre will get more revenue.
Mr. Sinha, how is the centre placed in this new body? This is the only body under the Constitution in our last 75 years where all the states are equal. One state, one vote. It doesn't work like that even in the Rajya Sabha. How does that change the centre's bargaining position? They have to get 19 state votes for any law to pass. If the centre wants a law, 19 states out of 31 have to support, and then the game is theirs. Will you see the centre cajoling the smaller states, you know, the 7 northeastern states or the union territories very quickly? How will politics move? What is the politics of the GST Council?
Let me share a secret with you. When I was chairing the Standing Committee of Finance in the 15th Lok Sabha, and we were looking at GST constitutional amendment basis, this is exactly the question that I asked of the officials of the Finance Ministry. I said, we are all the time showing concern about the interests of the states and loss of revenue and this, that, and the other. But have you ever paused to consider what is going to happen to you, to your powers? And it's not merely what happens in the GST Council. What happens to the Government of India's power to impose cesses? What happens to the Government of India's power to take certain other emergency measures? Will all this go to the GST Council, and then we'll have to have prior approval of the states? And why would the states not, oppose such charges by the Government of India, which are not shared by with the states? There are all these issues which will have to be considered and settled by the GST Council. But all in all, I'll say that the life of the finance minister is not going to be the same, and he'll have much more. We'll have to work much more diplomatically than in the past.
Right. Mr. Sinha, before we let you go, sir, as I said, we are going to get more details from the Finance Minister later this afternoon. But what is it that you would like to hear from him? What kind of clarity would you like from the government as they put this plan in motion?
Well, I think this, as far as the railways, merging of the railway budget is concerned, they would have worked out the details, and I hope the Finance Minister in his press conference would be able to throw some light on this and tell the country what is the autonomy which the railways will continue to enjoy even after the merger of their budget with the general budget.
Fair point, sir. We will look forward to those details as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha, for joining us with your quick take.